Hey everybody, welcome back to Barter Hordes. My name is Robert. Happy Friday, happy weekend. If you're a golfer, and I know that's rare that anybody on BookTube cares about sports, but if you're a golfer, happy Masters weekend. The annual pilgrimage to white privilege in Augusta, Georgia. Hate everything that golf club stands for, and yet I still love the tournament. Go figure. Anyway, I'm here today to do my third video this week, which is rare, but it's a tag video, the My Pleasure book tag. This tag was started by Steve Partridge, and I'll link his version of this tag down below. But I was tagged last week by Shawn Shawn the Book Maniac, and I'll also put his version of this in the description box. This one took me a little while. There's some difficult questions for me to answer, and so I'm going to be referring to some notes today, so forgive me, because some of these books are ones that I've read a long time ago, because I had trouble finding something that fit the prompt exactly. And the first prompt is to think. A book that made you think hard. Originally, I was thinking about going with Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, but I'm not sure it really made me think hard. It just made my head hurt. It did make me realize that I am not a scientist. I don't have a scientist's background, and I'm not sure I ever could have. It was fascinating, but I'm not sure how much I got out of it. It was over my head, and I wasn't even in a hurry. So I ended up going with another book that fascinated me from about 2 years ago. I read it 2 years ago, and that is The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert. You may already know about this book, you may not. Kolbert goes back and studies over the most recent 500 million years, the 5 major extinctions on Earth. And she analyzes all the different characteristics of them, including the one where a giant meteor is supposedly responsible for wiping out the dinosaurs. The rest of the book, though, is talking about the 6th extinction that scientists are predicting and are worried about and are monitoring now. And of course, the big difference between the previous 5 extinctions and the current one that we're working on is this one's completely human-made. And that's what's so frightening about this one, is that we may be the culprit, and it could be the most devastating of the 6 extinctions. And I just found it a fascinating book, but it just makes you second guess everything we've done as a species on this planet and that we continue to do. So the one that made me think hard was The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert. The second prompt is Love, a book that broke or mended your heart. And in some ways, I think this book both broke and mended my heart. And it's probably a book a lot of people on BookTube have seen as too sentimental. I loved it. I thought it was wonderful, but I'm a sucker for World War II stories anyway, and this was The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaffer and Annie Barrows. And one of the reasons it broke my heart, besides the fact that it's a World War II story, which always gets to me, is that it's the last book that Marianne Schaffer could work on. In fact, she had to get Annie Barrows to help her finish it because she was dying of cancer at the time she was writing it. And so there will be no more books from Marianne Schaffer. I don't remember all the details of the book. It's a novel where somebody in London is contacted by somebody on the Isle of Guernsey because they found her name in a book that made its way to this group of people. And they start a correspondence, and she gradually becomes part of their community from a distance. And Juliet, the woman who writes all these letters from London, is, except for Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, who without a doubt is my literary love forever, Juliet is the other character, I think, in all of literature that I have fallen for. She was just wonderful, warm, optimistic, just a delight to read. And so that both mended my heart because of her letters, but it also broke my heart that we'll have no more books from that author. The third one is Eat, a book that nourishes you. And this may be an odd choice because it's a book about books. A friend of mine in London several years ago sent me a copy of 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. And I let it sit on my to be read pile for quite a while, not really knowing that much about it. I'd heard the title, but I didn't know much about it. And then I picked it up one day, and it's very short, and so you read it in a couple of hours at most. And it's the story of a woman who is a book person in New York, Helene Hanff, who writes for some copies of used books to a bookseller, an old-time famous bookseller in London. And there's this sentimental relationship, this friendship that grows between her and the bookseller in London, and ultimately all the staff at this bookstore too, because this relationship goes on for years and years and years, and they never actually meet in person. It's only through letters. I did go see the movie version of it not too terribly long ago, and it's changed where she actually goes to the bookstore after he's passed away and meets some of the staff. I don't think that actually happened in real life, but the book is really about their correspondence and that relationship. And it's a love story, but it's a love of books and of community. And to me, I just found that really inspiring, and so that nourishes me. The next one is Laugh, a book that brought a little comic relief. And this book didn't bring a little comic relief. This book made me pee my pants. I was laughing so hard. And it's Roddy Doyle's first novel, The Commitments, which I think is from the mid to late 80s. And it's the first of a 3-book trilogy now known as the Barrytown trilogy. The second one is The Snapper, and the third one is The Van, which follows some of the same characters. But The Commitments is just simply a group of Irish youth who decide that they are going to bring soul back to Dublin, and they form a band. But what is so outrageously hysterical is the dialogue. It's in slang. It's difficult for an American to understand at first, but once you start hearing it in your head instead of just reading it on the page, it's absolutely hysterical. You cannot listen to this dialogue and not laugh. I have seen the movie version much longer after I read the book, but it was hysterical too, but nothing like the book. And The Snapper and The Van are just as funny. So for a real laugh out loud experience, for me, it was Roddy Doyle's the Barrytown trilogy, especially the first one, The Commitments. I haven't read it in forever. I need to go back and reread it and see if I still like it as much as I did back in the 80s. The next one is Sex, a book that explores or contains sexuality that doesn't make you cringe. And that second part of the prompt is what makes this so difficult. If you follow Steve Donahue, he's gone on this rant a number of times that no one writes about sex in novels without making you cringe. It's really hard to do. And so I struggled. The reason this tag took me almost 2 weeks to film is because I couldn't think of a single book that fit until I went all the way back to my undergraduate days to a book that was written in the 1960s. And I don't remember a lot of the details of this book. I just remember at the time feeling not uncomfortable, but just amazed that this book was so erotic at times. And that is John Fowles' The Magus. If you don't know the story, it's set in Greece. It's kind of a literary thriller. A man sets up kind of this fantasy world on a private island, and the blending between reality and fantasy is what makes this book so interesting and so mysterious. But throughout the book, there are scenes in there that are just downright erotic. So that's the only one I could think of in 30 or 40 years of reading books, though, that didn't make me cringe. So this is a really tough one. Number 6, Rest, a book that gives you peace, reflection, or just calms you down. I didn't really know how to interpret this one, and so I went with 2 books that I found, and they're both very recent books to me. I found both of them extremely charming. I've written about them on my blog. I think I even filmed a video about one of these. The first one is Frederick Bachman's A Man Called Uwe, and it's a very popular book now. A lot of people know about it, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's the story of an older man who's a curmudgeon. He's cranky, he wants to be bitter. He's lost his wife after a long love of his life relationship, and he just wants to join her. He just wants to die. And every time he tries to take his own life, something interrupts him and gets in the way. It's kind of a Silas Marner story, if you're familiar with George Eliot's book, in that a family that moves into his little community latches onto him and doesn't let him go and drags him back into life. And I just found the story just wonderfully charming. I've even seen the movie version, and I thought they did a pretty good version of the translation between book to film. I thought that was a pretty good version of that. The other one is a much more recent book, Rachel Joyce's The Music Shop, which I talked about on one of my videos not too terribly long ago. And it too is just something that really charmed me. It's probably too sentimental for some people, but it charmed me. It's part love story, but the love story is partly to music rather than just to another individual. But it's about a man whose mother instilled in him a love of vinyl records. Everything from the classics, the blues, everything. And he hated seeing the music industry go away from vinyl, first to cassettes and then to CDs, and now it's all digital. And he opened a vinyl shop only. He refused to sell any other media. And he meets a woman through this, and they have a very interesting, uncomfortable, strained relationship at first until they get to know each other. So I just found it a wonderfully charming book, and I really want to go read some of her earlier books. So that one I picked two books, A Man Called Uwe and The Music Shop. And for the last one is Experience, a book that introduced you to a new subject or shifted your perspective. And there's so many ways to go with this one. I actually had a wealth of choices. So I picked two. One is nonfiction, one is fiction. The nonfiction I picked was made into an Oscar-nominated film, so everybody's heard of it, and that's Hidden Figures. Let me get the exact subtitle of that because it kind of tells you what the book's about if you don't already know. Hidden Figures, The American Dream and the Untold Story of the Black Women Mathematicians Who Helped Win the Space Race, by Margot Lee Shatterly. What I loved about this is, first of all, that's a true story. I love stories like this that are heartwarming and also happen to be true. They seem to make really fantastic movies, or the kind of movies that I find really fantastic anyway. But what I liked about the book more so than the movie is the movie only tells half of the story, and it ignores the first half of the story when these women first start getting hired to test naval aircraft. Before it even becomes NASA, before they get involved in the space mission, they're testing in wind tunnels and doing the mathematical modeling for the Air Force and the Navy. And they're fighting all the Jim Crow laws because they're stationed in Virginia. And it's just a remarkable story of the lengths these women had to go to, not just for a little respect, but just to be allowed to work in the field. I did this one through audiobook. I was on my trip this last year where I was driving back from Canada down to southern Florida, so a long trip. And it was one of the books I listened to on the way back, and I was just mesmerized. It was wonderful. Of course, the movie covers the part where they work for NASA, but there's so much more in the book that they couldn't fit into the 2-hour film that I think the book is really worth picking up. And the audio version was just a delight to listen to. And the other one I picked for this is a novel from 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago, Ya Jesse's Homegoing, her debut novel, which kind of took the world by storm. I was really fortunate to meet her. She was the local public library here, Broward County Public Library, does an event every year in conjunction with Nova Southeastern University, which is where I was teaching at their private high school. And just by chance, Ya Jesse was the speaker, and the school's book club, our high school book club, had read Homegoing a couple of months before that. I had not read it until I heard she was coming, and then I picked it up and absolutely got frustrated by the first 4 chapters when I realized she was only going to give us a few pages with each character, but then fell in love with the way they all interweave their stories. And so we went to this, but the people who put the meeting on screwed up the publicity and no one knew about it. It was basically my group of students and Ya Jessie. And she was so gracious. She stayed there and answered everybody's questions, took pictures with every single student, signed all our books. What was delightful about the talk is that she talked about her research process for this and how she wrote about 150 pages of this with a much more traditional narrative structure before realizing it wasn't working, and scratched it all and started over again with the kind of unique narrative structure that she has. For those of you who haven't read it, and there may be 2 of you in the world, it's a story that covers about 300 years of history. There are 2 half-sisters in Ghana. One marries an English slaver and lives in the Gold Coast castle in Ghana, and the other half-sister is sold into the slave trade that's going on the Gold Coast. And at one point at the very beginning of the story, they're both in the castle, but one's living there, the other one's in the prison below, and they don't know that the other exists or is there. And so it follows the 300 years of Ghanaian history after this event, and the different fights and the civil wars that have gone on, partly because of the slave trade. And then it follows the other one who gets shipped to America and follows her descendants. And so it covers generation after generation of these 2 half-sisters' families and how they interweave. And I just absolutely loved it. It was my favorite read of 2016, hands down. And after getting to meet Jessie and listening to her talk about her process, it just changed everything I thought, not just about the history that I didn't know anything about Ghanaian history, but about the research process that she went through to write a historical novel like this, which is fascinating to me because I'm hoping to write a historical novel. It's not going well right now. So those 2 together, both partly about African American history in the United States, but also going beyond that, I found fascinating and expanded my experience as a reader. One of the things that I love about reading is that I'm able to experience, to a degree, life stories that I could never experience myself. And it's just an expansion of my worldview, getting to read a story about a woman, about an African, about an American woman in a different time period. All these different experiences that I can never have myself, I can at least have to a degree vicariously through the reading, which is really why I fell in love with reading in the first place, is reading about other types of stories beyond my own experience. So there you have it. It's the My Pleasure book tag. I'm going to tag a bunch of people, but basically my philosophy on tags is if you haven't done this tag and you're watching this one and you'd like to do it, you are tagged. I'm going to name some people specifically, but please do it anyway if I don't name you. These just happen to be some people that I watch their channels closely, and to my knowledge, they haven't done this tag yet. The first one is a relatively, like myself, a relatively new booktuber, and it's Lindsey at Lindsey's Book Life, and I'll put all the links to their channels down in the description box. I have to tag Kendra Winchester because she just eats up these kinds. She can remember so many books that she'll have great answers for this. One of my buddy reads for April is with Claire of Claire Reads Books, so I'm going to tag her as well. I'm going to tag Pamela Glass of Gold Seamed Glass. She's in the middle of doing Veda, a video every day in April, so she may not get to this one for a while, but I hope she gets to it after April settles down for her. Another new book tagger who was a former teacher and also a former bookseller, so I'm going to tag Jason of Old Blues Chapter and Verse. I don't think Britta Böhler has done this one yet, so she's tagged. 2 more, I promise I'll be done. I don't think Russell has done this one yet from Ink and Paper blog. And then the last one is Michelle from Challenge Thy Shelf. So all of those people are tagged. I don't know if they'll watch this and know that they're tagged. I don't know how to get that word out to people who don't see my video. But like I said, if you have not done this video and you're interested in these questions, please do. I think they're a really fascinating set of prompts. Okay, until next week, I'll see you soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.